Get to know the Word of God, becoming familiar with Jesus Christ, Part 4. The fourth and last set of history books recorded in the Old Testament is the divided, exiled, and restored period, also known as the Dur period. The saying to remember here is the second of the double books. These are the remaining books of history. The Dur period is comprised of 6 books, the latter half of 1 Kings, 2 Kings, the remaining 3/4 of 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, which was once known as Ezra too, and Esther, which took place during the same time frame as the book of Ezra. God's story of Esther is the fascinating one that most don't know, as I will explain in a few moments. This time period encompasses the time frame when Israel split into 2 nations, namely Israel and Judah. The kings after Solomon were all bad in the nation of Israel, which is what spawned God's chastening of his people, throwing them into exile after their following in the ways of their wicked kings. The nation of Judah had their chastening delayed only because of a handful of kings that were good and followed in the ways of the Lord. After a 70-year exile, the Israelite people come back to the land. This is spoken about in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. The first book in this section is the second half of 1 Kings, namely chapters 12 through 22. After the death of Solomon in 930 BC, Israel split into 2 kingdoms. Judah, which was made up of 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and Israel, which was made up of the remaining 10 tribes. This section presents an interrelated picture of developments within the 2 nations. The kingdoms are in turmoil because of the wickedness of the kings after Solomon and the disobedience of the people following these idolaters. The prophet Elijah is spoken of pretty extensively here, with his battle against the Baal priests given as an example. His successor, Elisha, is also introduced at the end of 1 Kings. The time frame covers about 90 years, up to about 840 BC. 2 Kings, which is the next book, picks up where this book leaves off. Continuing with the first book of Kings, where it leaves off, this book speaks of Elijah's ministry ending and Elisha's beginning. It speaks of Elisha's exploits as a prophet of God. The nation of Israel is taken into captivity at the hands of the Assyrians in 722 BC due to the wickedness of the kings and the rejection of God's messengers. Judah's fate is only delayed because of the occasional godly kings. The latter part of this book speaks of Judah's plight after Israel has already fallen. The exile of Judah takes place at the hands of the Babylonians a century later in 607 BC, with the fall of Jerusalem soon after in 586 BC. The second part of 2 Chronicles records the history of the nation of Judah and its kings after the death of Solomon. The nation splits into 2 nations shortly after Solomon's death, helped by Solomon's son Rehoboam and his unwise decisions. The remainder of this book explains why Judah would eventually fall. Contrary to Israel, the nation of Judah had occasionally good kings, which brings about a reformation which produces God's blessing upon the nation. Kings like Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joash, Hezekiah, and Josiah. Unfortunately, is short-lived and only temporary. The temple of the Lord is destroyed, and the nation of Judah eventually falls at the hands of the Babylonians in 607 BC, and the city of Jerusalem soon falls in 586 BC. The book of Ezra takes place exactly 70 years after the exile of God's people from their land. The Persian Empire allows the Hebrews to return to their homeland. There are 3 returns recorded. The first 2 returns are spoken of in this book. In 537 BC, Zerubbabel leads some of the people back to rebuild the temple. A problem ensues, however, for the people don't want to come back. So only a portion come back to rebuild the temple. Later, in 458 BC, another leader named Ezra brings the people back to their homeland in Israel. Ezra is writer of this book and the subsequent book of Nehemiah. In the Hebrew Old Testament, these 2 books are one and the same. The book of Nehemiah focuses on the third and last return of the Hebrew people back to the Promised Land. The decree is made in 444 BC to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. It is actually a rather fantastical event. The amazing thing that takes place is not that the wall was rebuilt, but how quickly it was done. It only took 52 days to rebuild the wall. It didn't take a year or 2 or even 5 as you might expect. How this was done is explained in this book. So why is this event so important? This is the starting point for the prophet Daniel's vision of the 70 weeks in fulfilling the history of mankind and announcing the Messiah. Daniel lived about 100 years prior to this event. His vision was exactly timed to the very day that the Messiah would be cut off or killed. The remainder of this book gives instruction and the restoration of God's people after the exile. The story of Esther takes place in between the first and second returns of the Hebrew people back to the Promised Land. The time is after Zerubbabel, yet before Ezra. The providence of God and the protection of his people is on full display in the land of Persia. Esther becomes the wife of Xerxes, the king of Persia. She and her cousin Mordecai show in their actions to trust God and to do his bidding no matter the repercussions. To ultimately put your trust in God. Their loyalty to God produces blessing for them and providentially delivers God's people from annihilation. These events are the spur that God uses to awaken his people to come back to him in the land that he promised them. The time frame spans more than 500 years from Solomon's reign as king to the time of the Reformation under Nehemiah around 425 BC. Remember, second of the double books. This section begins with the second half of 1 Kings, followed by 2 Kings, then the latter 3/4 of 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, which was once known as Ezra 2, as I said before, and finally Esther. E-N-E ends this section. It's an easy way to remember it. The last section of history books is in the Old Testament. Now let's go over the first 17 books of the Bible to this point. Again, this is the entire section of history books in the Old Testament. No longer is there any help for you with the beginning 8 books. We begin with the book of Genesis, followed by Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, first half of 1 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, first half. That is followed by the second half of 1 Kings, 2 Kings, the second half of 2 Chronicles, and followed by Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Pause here to take your worksheet out and fill out the page 5 that corresponds to this section. Then proceed to the next section.